The International Monetary Fund has a grim warning for the global economy. Tackle Europe's debt woes immediately or face a deep recession. So far, Australia's weathered the worldwide economic crisis well, but even we're not immune now. The IMF's halved our economic growth forecast. But critics of the IMF are saying, hang on a minute, that the IMF's not just some objective forecaster, it's a player, and its own statements are helping bring on the downturn it fears. Here's Stephen Long.
It was dubbed the Great Recession. As housing markets imploded and banks collapsed, the world plunged into the sharpest downturn since the 1930s. Now the recovery is in jeopardy.
The global economy has entered a dangerous new phase. The recovery has weakened considerably, and downside risks have increased sharply.
As nations in Europe go broke, as banks stop lending, as output slows, and the recovery in the advanced economies grinds to a halt, the world's economic authorities are bowing to the inevitable. Even after a sharp cut, the IMF's base case forecast is 4% growth in the world economy, but it's not all that optimistic.
Low growth, fiscal and financial weaknesses can easily feed on each other. Lower growth makes fiscal consolidation harder, and fiscal consolidation may lead to lower growth. Lower growth weakens banks, and weaker banks lead to tighter bank lending and lower growth. In short, there are clear downside risks to the forecast that I've given you.
Risks include the debt crisis in Europe morphing into a banking crisis, a new wave of mortgage defaults hitting the US economy, and the bursting of the real estate bubble in Asia. If that happens, the IMF says, a serious global downturn would ensue, undoing much of the progress since the end of the Great Recession. The United States and the Eurozone would fall back into recession, commodity prices would plummet, and growth in Asia and the emerging markets would fall sharply, halving the world growth outlook.
The IMF historically has always been an overly optimistic organisation. Their predictions have been pretty wrong. So if they're telling a grave story, we should really sit up and take notice.
Well, when we're talking about the IMF, we're talking about an organisation of more than 1,800 economists. Now, on top of that, we have 3,000 economists, for example, working for the OECD. And these big organizations clearly didn't foresee the global financial crisis, and now they're going to tell us how we're going to get out of it.
The gloomier assessment of the world economic outlook came just one day after yet another European nation had its credit rating cut.
More agonising news on Italy's economy and yet another problem for Berlusconi's government.
For Italy, the timing is terrible. It has to roll over a record level of debt this month, 62 billion euros, equivalent to more than 80 billion Australian dollars. But the implications extend well beyond Italy.
Part of the European Rescue Fund is backed by Italy. If Italy gets downgraded, the rescue fund is a problem because other countries will then have to jump in. Now, if other countries are asked to guarantee more, their own credit rating is in danger. And that means that the Italian downgrade could actually trigger a spiral of downgrades affecting other countries as well.
It has been seen as a debt crisis, and in that sense different from 2008, which was cast as a liquidity crisis. I think we can start to see elements of a liquidity crisis re-emerging because there's evidence out there that banks don't want to lend to each other, that they're wary of the asset foundations of other banks, and they're wary of their own position vis-a-vis the assets they're holding. So what's being called on now again is the state has to grease the wheels of interbank relations.
In the face of widespread protest, the IMF is demanding that indebted nations impose fiscal austerity, hike taxes and cut spending. But that cure is worsening the illness, undermining economic growth and driving up budget deficits.
Greece is an economy, for example, in rapid decline, and so is Spain. And so the policy is to, if you like, and this is a brutal analogy, cut the legs off an economy which can hardly run at the moment, and then expect it to run faster.
What are the prospects of a Greek default now?
I think it's almost certain that Greece will default. The only question is when.
How soon could it be?
Well, ideally this weekend.
Buoyed by China, Australia feels a little distant from the problems in Europe and the US, yet the IMF has cut its forecast for economic growth here from 3% to just 1.8%, and that's presuming the Asian boom continues. The only certainty at the moment is instability.
We're facing a world without a monetary anchor. We've got no stable unit of measure. Yet in all our social and cultural as well as financial transactions, we need to be in a world, or we perceive we need to be in a world, where there is some stable unit of measure that we can trust. So I think it adds another deeper layer of fragility to the global financial system.